And what's happening, everyone? Welcome on in to the Check Your Brain podcast here. Wherever you're watching this or listening to this, I'm going to put this out on YouTube, Rumble. It's going to be on Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. Go find Check Your Brain at locals.com. My name is Tony Mazur, and we are a couple of weeks into the baseball season. So, by the way, if you are following along for free on the free podcast, yes, I do some episodes. I talk about what's going on in the world. Last week's was on East Palestine, Ohio. So I'll get into some serious topics and others not so serious, like the state of Major League Baseball. And we're a couple of weeks into the baseball season. So I figured I haven't really even talked about baseball. I haven't talked about much going on in spring training. We're already here in mid-April. I've barely mentioned it. So why not? Why not get into some of the statistics, some of the things that have happened, the changes in baseball? Are they going to be good? I've talked about it many times on this podcast. I am an old school baseball guy. Pitch clocks, bigger stolen bases, throwing the ball over to first base only 2 times you can do it, and all these other things we're going to get into in the podcast. I'll introduce my guest, Brandon, who's a fellow patron on Patreon. Again, if you want to subscribe, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur, and he is a longtime patron of mine, and he's also a podcaster. He's on the doing a lot of other stuff and betting shows. If you want to get the plugs out, where can we find you on social media, and where can we listen to the podcast?
You can check out This Guy Gets It 93 at twitter.com, and you can check out I started my own podcast, just a bunch of random shit. I'm not a professional broadcaster, comedian. I'm just a regular guy who just, I'm here to have fun. Hopefully I do get better at podcasting though. You can check out Brandon's Shitty Stream. It's on youtube.com at Brandon Shitty Stream.
There you go. So always have a curse in there because it's great for the algorithm.
Right. Well, it's there's an asterisk in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
but we connected probably a year or so ago, and especially with love of baseball. If you're not watching on video, he's got his Yankees hat on. You've got I see in the background, is that Derek Jeter? Is that
Yep.
Is that like a big?
Yeah, there's only 150 of these, and there's a capsule of game-used dirt, which Jeter himself played on.
Jeter and dirt. I remember one time, I might have told you the story, but when I was covering the team that at the time they were still known as the Cleveland Indians, and it was when A-Rod was trying to go after his 600th home run. So this is 2010, and they had a 4-game series in Cleveland at was Progressive Field at the time, and it still is, unfortunately, no matter how many times we want to call it the Jake or Jacobs Field. Yeah. And so A-Rod has 4 games. So you're thinking upwards of maybe 16 times that he's going to come to the plate and possibly hit his 600th home run. So, and I'm a member of the media at the time, and I got a chance to go in the visitors' locker room and talk to Joe Girardi. And I'm sitting there, and I sat down in the dugout, and I've got Mark Teixeira on one side of me, and I've got Derek Jeter on the other, and I have you have A-Rod kind of walking around, and everybody. I'm just like, this is a surreal thing, and I'm like, and I'm going to see history. I'm going to see how many guys have hit 600 home runs. That whole series, I think A-Rod, his best shot was a fly out to center field. And the rest of it, he struck out or he grounded out. And then, of course, the first game, he comes back to Yankee Stadium. He hits the home run, and it's 600. So I'm like, yeah, great, of course. But no, it's so you're a Yankee fan. I'm an Angels fan, but I also understand what the Angels have gone through. The old meme of Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani's doing things that no one has done since Mordecai Three Fingers Brown or whatever. And Mike Trout hit 3 home runs. And oh, by the way, the Angels lost to the Tigers 8-3 today. So we haven't really done much as far as the Angels go in our history, especially recent history in the last 10 plus years, even though they'll make a splash in free agency and do absolutely nothing with it, whether it's Pujols, whether it's CJ Wilson, Anthony Rendon, Josh Hamilton, you name it. So there's a lot of real problems. But so I wanted to do this podcast. I figured I'd talk to you about it. And you and I were kind of talking off the air before we hit record. about some of those changes, and one that you are a fan of because you get a chance to see a little bit more action, more baseball, is this pitch clock. So talk about what are your thoughts on how things have come about, because they've had this soft pitch clock the last couple of years. They didn't really enforce it, and now the umpires are really paying attention, and you're seeing games getting decided by this.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate. That itself is unfortunate. If it came down to a last strike or a last ball, and you got the winning run on third, that would be bad. But I do like the games being shorter. However, I'm like you. I'm an old school guy. The only thing I do I like the DH, and I kind of like the pitch clock. But as far as if the guy doesn't throw the ball in time, or the batter doesn't get ready in time, or he tries to call time, I'm not a fan of that. But I don't see any way around it. Just the constant rule changes though are just they're trying to attract more fans. Like, you're not going to be able to recreate the boom of the steroid era. That's what they're trying to do. They tried it a few years ago in 2019 when you had guys hitting close to 40 home runs that never hit over 30. Like Gleyber Torres, Brett Gardner, guys like that, former Yankee guys that were just mashing the ball that year. The bigger bases, they want people to run on the base pass. I still think the stolen base, it is being utilized a little bit more because the bigger bases, but before that, it was kind of dying out. You don't want to take the bat out of your number 3 or number 4 guy just because you wanted to steal a base. But
well, that was and let's get to a couple of more of those things. We'll kind of spread them out through the podcast here, because the pitch clock has been interesting. Because as I said, they soft launched it a couple of years ago. No one really enforced it. Now they're enforcing it. Right. It's changing games, and it's making the game shorter. But ultimately, let's be honest here. If you're under 30 and you're not really much of a baseball fan, and what kept you away was the length of games, I guarantee those people are not coming back to baseball, even if the games are shortened by anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes. What Rob Manfred, the commissioner, has done everything he can to ruin the sport, just gut it from the inside. And to think that millennials and Zoomers who are going to go watch a baseball game, all they want are home runs. Well, that's what happened a couple of years ago. In 2013, I remember Pedro Alvarez led the league in home runs for the Pirates. And I think he had like 35 or 37 home runs. All of a sudden, a couple of years later, they're setting home run records, like team records and league records, way past the steroid era. Is it because weight training is a little better? Is it guys are putting a little extra creatine powder in their soft drinks? Or are they dieting better than they used to in the past? Or did they do something to manipulate the baseballs? They tightened the strings inside where they are essentially super balls or golf balls that were coming off their bats. And then you're seeing home run records fall. And like you said, there are guys that normally, like I remember Elvis Andrus, who was a guy who may hit 5 home runs. I think he hit 25 one year. So their mindset is, the only way we can get more people into the game is they don't want to see the 2-to-1 pitchers duel. They want to see the 10-9, 8 home runs by each team game. And looking at the ratings, and by the way, this is pre-COVID too. Looking at the ratings, didn't really do anything. So little soon to figure out what's going to happen here. But I just think the shortening the games in some ways, I mean, maybe it brings 2 fans, but is it really worth it down the road of possibly pissing off a lot of old school baseball fans who don't really care about the state of play?
Yeah. And you're exactly right, because you could bring in a new fan, but a longtime fan, you don't know if a new fan will stick around. These longtime fans, all these rule changes, they could, get annoyed with it, and they are getting annoyed with it. I kind of do like the pitch clock, but however, like you said, if it's going to change the outcome of games, I can't stand by that.
I mean, the great part about baseball was you had that opportunity where, maybe a 4-hour game is 9 innings. Some games where you have a quick pitcher's duel. I remember many times, it doesn't matter the era, you'll have a couple of games that are just over 2 hours because you got a pitcher who's just really efficient. Verlander for many years with the Tigers was that kind of guy that he gets the ball and he's looking in and ready to throw another pitch. Mark Burley was another example of that. And then what was delaying baseball games? Was it the fact that guys are stepping out too many times and digging in, adjusting their like Nomar Garcia-Parra. They're adjusting their wristband, and they've got the gloves, and they've got the pine tar in the hat, and doing this and this, and then they step out again, and then the pitcher steps out and then throws over to first a couple of times. The pitch clock, I'll say this, that doesn't bother me as much, but the throwing over to first base, the limits on that, I don't like those limits. I think that one is probably the worst one, because you'll get a guy that, so here's the rule for folks who don't know, that you can only throw over to first base twice. And if you throw over a third time, you got to make sure that he's going to be caught or it's a balk. Now, the catcher can throw down to first base all he wants to try to pick you off, but to have a limit that, hey, by the way, you can only throw to first base twice, then if you have a speedy guy, then he might have that opportunity. Well, he already threw over twice. What's my incentive to try to steal? I mean, and then it changes the mindset of a pitcher, because now he's going, I already threw over twice. This guy's a steal threat. Now I can't throw anything off speed, so now I got to throw a fastball. It changes a lot. It's adding unnecessary strategy to the game right now.
Right. I wasn't even aware of that rule change. You can only throw over twice. That is insane, because remember guys like, I used to watch old Mets games with my dad when I was growing up. Al Leiter, he would throw over to first, how many, 4, 5, 6 times in an at-bat? I don't know if you remember watching Al Leiter. Andy Pettit, he always had a good pickoff move. He would throw over to first quite a bit too. So you're taking, you're taking an easy out, which you can get if you had a southpaw with a good pickoff move. You're taking an out he can make. You're going to let a speedy guy steal a base. Now you're going to have a runner in scoring position. You're already, the one I hate the most though is the guy, the extra inning. You got a guy on second base. That's utterly
I can't believe they're still doing that. I mean, that is embarrassing. I understood
that is like some backyard T-ball stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it is to the level of everybody gets ice cream after the game. That's embarrassing. That I actually forgot. I thought they were trying to get rid of that. And
that's what I thought too.
Yeah, it might be after this year. I'm not sure. I don't remember, but I remembered reading that they were trying to get rid of it. And I was watching games over the weekend and noticed that these games are being decided because they put a ghost runner on second base. And by the way, it's not just any ghost runner. It's the guy who made the last out the previous inning. So you're rewarding the guy for making the last out in the last inning by putting him on second base. Then that changes the strategy of, what do we do? Do we walk the next guy, which is now not a 4-pitch walk? It's immediately they go over to first base. All these things have changed in baseball. This is a game that's been around for 160 years. And in the last couple of years, we decide now we're going to overhaul huge swaths of this game. And I'm sorry if I sound very boomer right now to some audience members, but I get that the game needed a little bit of a refresher course. It needed maybe a little jump start in some ways. I don't know if this is the way. I don't know. And maybe it's too soon to tell. Maybe I'll eat my words years down the road and I'll go, hey, I looked at the ratings, the World Series is up, but I just don't see it. I don't see it being the case.
Right. And it makes you think, like, what's next? Because I was born in 93. So Bud Selig was the commissioner for like most of my childhood going into like my early adulthood. And then you had Manfred take over. It makes me think, one, how much longer is he going to stay in his position? And two, like, what's next? Is he going to have a 10 or 11 man batting lineup? We're going to add an extra guy to a batting lineup. We're going to have 2 DHs in a lineup. He could, this guy's changing the game altogether. He could come up with more crazy rules. You don't know what these guys are saying behind the scenes.
I almost feel it's being gutted from the inside. Baseball's being imploded, where you can have other sports go up against a baseball game. I mean, we've seen that. We're seeing that right now. The MLB and the NBA and the NHL playoffs are going up against regular season baseball. And if your town, like for example, I'm in Cleveland, and the Cavaliers are going up against, and the team once known as the Indians, now the Guardians. If there's a regular season game against Kansas City, or a Cavaliers playoff game, even if there's fringe audiences on both ends, more people and more TVs around town are going to be tuned into NBA. That's just what's going to happen in a 162 game season. That's where I'm wondering the next thing is, it's going to get dropped down to 140. I think they're going to look in terms of putting a 145 game season. They're going to say 162 is too much. Well, here's the problem. 162 too much, then you drop down to 145. Then you'll have the same people are going to complain 145 is too much. It needs to be 120. Where do you stop? Where do we stop?
Yeah.
Where do we stop appeasing people who don't care that much about the game?
Yeah, exactly. And then this makes me sound like a baseball mark and savant or whatever. You're gonna no records are gonna be broken anymore because they're gonna be playing shorter games. So you're not gonna have anybody break any home run records. You're not gonna have like any milestone or record breaking or anything. It's already gonna be washed away, just like the Hall of Fame. And I loved your episode with the I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the Scott Rowland episode, that was great.
Oh yeah.
That was great, man.
Yeah, he should not
Like,
have.
already...
Well, and like you said, that a lot of those records are just going to be absolute things of the past. I mean, clearly
Right.
Cal Ripken's. You talk about the unbreakable records. You have Cal Ripken's 2,000 plus game streak. It'll never be broken. And I'm a firm believer that it should never be broken because Cal Ripken was selfish. That, you know, this as a Yankee fan, if Cal Ripken were healthy and decided that instead of trying to play in this game streak, that if he took a couple of days off in the 90s, that Oriole team probably would have beaten the Yankees. They would have, forget Jeffrey Mayer over in right field, would have probably beat them in 96 and went to the World Series against Atlanta. But because one of your key members decides to play with hamstring pulls and torn this and broken that and strained and sprained, stuff like that, just because he wants to get a record going, it's kind of a selfish thing for a team. So, those records are not going to be broken. And of course, we all know stolen bases are now a thing of the past. Now, you and I are both watching the same game right now in the background. We just see a stolen base by, I didn't see who that was. Is that Nimmo? For the Mets?
See here.
No, it's, I don't know who it is.
Nimmo's got a lot of speed, but they don't want him to steal bases. No, so Nimmo's at the plate. I believe that might have been Escobar.
Okay, yeah. So what they've done now is they're altering it by saying, we've heard for years there's no stolen bases. So what are we going to do? We're going to limit the throws over to first base to 2. And we're also going to make the bases bigger because it's going to create more people incentivized to steal bases. And maybe that'll work a little bit, but that part of the game is gone now. That part of the game is a thing of the past from a time when catchers were not as strong. And this is what it comes down to. As much as I would love to see stolen bases, I remember in the 90s when Ivan Rodriguez came on the scene, when he's playing for Texas, no one had a stronger cannon behind the plate than Ivan Rodriguez. No one, maybe even to this day, I still can't find it. Now every catcher grew up watching Pudge Rodriguez, and they all have cannons.
Yep.
Even Mike Fitzgerald of the Expos back in the day, a lot of these guys had noodles for arms, that you just basically got the guy who can, I don't know, stop a wild pitch, and he was your catcher. He hits 152 for the year. He bats 9th in your lineup. So catchers were always kind of like an afterthought. Well, now you have catchers who are hitting 35 home runs like JT Realmuto, and you need somebody who's going to be not going to be a liability. So that's why stolen bases from the days of Ricky Henderson, Vince Coleman, Tim Raines in the 80s, things have really changed, and you're going to get guys that are, even if they're going to steal a couple more bases, they'll probably steal 40 as opposed to 35 this year.
Right. And I've noticed this too, like guys that don't have any power, that they can bat like 280, 290, and they can steal a lot of bases, like a Juan Pierre kind of guy. They might bounce around the league. They'll bounce around from team to team because the GMs, they look into sabermetrics. They're like, okay, this guy's a one-dimensional player. He hits singles and steals bases. Like, they don't value small ball that much anymore. So you'll see guys like that. They'll be eventually designated for assignment and not in the league anymore. If they bat 250 and still steal a lot of bases, they don't want to keep them on as a pinch runner or a backup at all.
Billy Hamilton was a great example of that past couple of years. So that he was your leadoff hitter and your center fielder for the Reds for a number of years, but then, his batting average his on-base percentage wasn't as good as it should have been. So then he bounced around from team to team, and I don't know where he's at. I think he's out of baseball now or whatever.
Yeah.
But he was one of those guys that he's not going to hit you 300. Actually, nobody hits 300 virtually anymore. But I think they're an when you look at an organization that wants to put somebody together, if you are I'm looking at, here's a great example on TV. I'm looking at the first base coach of the Mets is Wayne Kirby. And Wayne Kirby played for the Indians, the Dodgers, a couple other teams in the past. He was a guy who's a fourth outfielder. He'd probably get you maybe at most 150 at bats a year. You put him out there because he's not going to hurt you in the field. He can pinch run. Those guys are gone now. You have to be more of a complete player in Major League Baseball. And I don't think that's a bad thing. As much as I complain about things now, you have to be a lot more of a complete player and not say, I'm only a catcher or I only play second base. It's like, nah, you're going to play right field today. Oh, I am? Okay. So you're seeing a lot more of that. So that's the one thing that I find interesting nowadays. But what we were talking about, the low on base percentage players and situational hitting, is I just don't see that as much. And anytime I bring that up to the sabermetrics people, they say it's because the pitchers throw too hard and they throw the ball inside. So you're not going to be able to have a guy hit the opposite field if they're trying to jam you the whole time. So my example I bring up all the time is someone like Joey Gallo, who's now with Minnesota. He's a guy, then you saw him with the Yankees. He'll hit, 170 for the year, but it'll get you 35, 45 home runs. And you say, well, wait a second. When they actually had the shift, which will be my next topic here, is everybody knows he's going to hit to the right side. They leave the entire left side open. So what does he do? He hits it to the right side instead of dunk, hits it the other way, and you'll be able to get an easy double out of it on a ball to third base. But they're not doing that. And their sabermetrics crew says, no, it's just better off trying to hit over and beat that shift, or at least beat where they're all set up. And I don't know, the lack of situational hitting, the lack of fundamentals are still what's bothering me about baseball today.
Yep. And you brought up a good name, Joey Gallo. I think he hit like 169 last year and only had 18 or 19 home runs. Like prior to, I'm going to say 2014, he wouldn't even have a job anymore. But this guy's still employed in Major League Baseball.
Well, some players, they have a use because you give them that opportunity to, okay, look, he hits a bunch of home runs. He's going to hit low batting average. Rob Deere was an example for the Milwaukee Brewers and the Tigers back in the day. You get Adam Dunn was one of those guys. Every so often, you'll have one of them who hits a nice, majestic home run. I think Franmil Reyes in the last couple of years was an all-or-nothing guy, the three genuine outcomes.
Yep.
But
Dave Kingman
was a great example. He struck out a lot, but had 450 career home runs. Not a Hall of Famer, but every so often you need some of those players. But what I find interesting was, again, old man Tony here grew up in the 90s, and guys like Jeff Bagwell was a 30-30 guy. Jeff Bagwell, the squatty guy who would squat and hit the ball 500 feet every time up. He's still got 30 steals in a year. You'd have, of course, Barry Bonds. You had Canseco. Canseco had a 40-40 year, of course. But he also had a 30-30 year later in his career. You're talking about a guy who I don't remember if it was Toronto or Tampa Bay, but towards the end of his career, he had a 30-30 season.
Yep.
And like, that's just unheard of for a power hitter that is also going to get on base, find a way to get on base, and tries to get to the next base. I don't know. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon, no matter how big or small they make the bases.
We'll never see another 40-40 guy. The last guy to officially get that was Alfonso Soriano in 2006. And I think Matt Kemp back in the early 2000, I think maybe 2011, I think he got super close. He got mightily close to getting a 40-40. And Acuna is the only one who might do it if he stays healthy. He could possibly do it. That's the only guy I can see doing 40-40. I think Trout has the ability to do it, but
he's not going to do it.
No, he doesn't want to risk injury.
Maybe Tim Anderson is another guy that has a potential, but I don't see him hitting 40 home runs. I see him being a 30-30 guy, but not 40-40. That's what's interesting. Or Julio Rodriguez, another guy that could be somebody to watch out for down the road.
Good young player.
So let's get to the shift. So I am somebody that I'm a firm believer in this shift, because if you are Joey Gallo, if you are some of these guys who hit to one side of the field, I think it should be free game to have everybody line up on that side of the field. I don't care. I would put the pitcher. If the pitcher was able to go anywhere near there, he would go on that side of the field. Well, they decided it's ruining baseball. Like, well, you set this precedent with all the sabermetrics and everything. You say that, launch angle, and our statistics show with the spray chart that he's going to hit over here. Okay, well then if he's going to hit over here, why not defend over there? Well, they've decided now, starting this year, that if you're a shortstop, you have to stay on the shortstop to third base side. And if you're a second baseman, you have to stay on your side of second base. You can shade, but you can't shift, I guess is what it is. So now we're starting to see a couple of more base hits up the middle because guys can only go so far over. And if you're somebody who is prone to being a middle to left side hitter, if you're a right-handed batter, if you're the second baseman and you know this, you can only go so far as almost near second base, but you're seeing a lot more singles are starting to pop up. Yep. And I some people really like it, but I'm somebody that the shift has been around for a while. Joe Madden kind of changed baseball the last 15 years with it, but I feel that if you're somebody who's prone to hitting on one side of the field, I say line everybody up until you learn to hit opposite way.
Yep. Exactly. Like, do situational hitting. Like, I remember seeing Jeter, he wasn't a pull hitter, but, he would go the opposite way in situations, like a runner on third. He would just try to, he had 2 strikes on him, he'd defend the plate. He'd just try to shoot the ball the other way, a weak little bloop single over the first baseman gets the run in. These guys just don't believe in situational hitting anymore. And it's ridiculous. And you are seeing, more singles now. And
I'm hoping the opportunity that this could lead to a couple more singles, but I want higher batting average. We can complain about the steroid era. And I'm not saying we, but like people can talk about it in these circles about the steroid era. Oh, these guys just hit monster home runs. They had adult acne and they had this. You go like, but they also hit 300.
Yep.
And steroids are not going to make you hit doubles into the gap. Like, yes, they'll help you, they'll enhance you at the gym, and you'll be able to be a little bit stronger. And because of that, you'll probably be able to lift the ball a little better. But it's also not making you hit those seeing eye singles over the, down the first base line. And a lot of those guys also hit for high averages. What you're seeing now are guys will hit 40 home runs and hit for a very low average. And you're seeing all-stars. This was never a thing when we were growing up. An all-star that would have a 200 batting average. That even if they had a lot of home runs, you still wouldn't put them in the all-star game because you're like, they're hitting 200. You can't have that. It looks terrible for our team.
Yep. This is going to sound nerdy, but sometimes I'll listen to a podcast, maybe you or Chad or somebody else, and I'll be like, while I'm listening to you guys, I'll go on Baseball Reference. I'll just look at random teams from the early 90s because that's the era I missed out on. And that in the 80s because I was born in 93, and I'll look, why did this guy retire at age 34? Oh, he started hitting 230, 240, and he turned 33, 34. He retired. Like, and my dad was born in 1948. If you hit under 250, 260, in the 60s, 70s, that was taboo back then. Now it's, that's okay. That's okay. 200 or above, you're getting on base, your exit velocity, that's all that matters. You're hitting the ball harder than 80% of the league. You'll have a starting job.
The 1995 Indians, their first baseman was Paul Sorrento. And I remember Sorrento hit 25 home runs that year, but he hit like 230. 235. And I'm just like, what a bum. Thank God this guy's gone. Then they replaced him with Julio Franco, who was, I think he was 50 then, and he played another 10 to 12 years.
Yeah.
But but Sorrento, who again, 25 home runs, hit about 230, was pretty average defensively. If he played nowadays, he is making $20 million a year.
Oh yeah,
I mean, he was a guy that he ended up signing with Seattle. He played there a couple of years, then played for the expansion Devil Rays, and that was it for his career. But if he were playing nowadays, a guy that was just a left-handed stick, plays first base, you DH him, maybe you throw him in the outfield for a game or two. That guy's making 9-figure salary.
Oh yeah, hands down. Yeah, it's insane the salaries nowadays too. Speaking of which, I'm gonna I'm gonna segue into this. This is just random out of the blue. What are your
Yep.
thoughts on? I don't think I asked you this last time. Trevor Bauer, former Cleveland Indian, former Cincinnati Red, former Cy Young Award winner, gets accused of something he was found innocent of, and I guess the lady that accused him works for MLB. He's playing in Japan now for $4 million
Yep.
this season, which is like a bargain, and no MLB team will touch him. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, so Trevor Bauer, I kind of saw the beginnings of much of his career in Cleveland. He came over from Arizona in a trade. It was a 3-team trade with Cincinnati, with Shin-Soo Choo going to Cincinnati for a year, and a couple other guys were moved around. I think there were a couple other.
Arizona
I forgot
too,
them.
right?
What's that?
He came from Arizona. Yeah, it was like a 3-team trade. Yeah.
He started in Arizona and he played from like 2013 till he got traded in 2019 because he threw the ball over the center field fence, which everyone
Yeah, I
told me
remember that
because he showed up Francona, and Francona doesn't like that. And it's, we kind of see what ended up happening. And then he won the Cy Young at Cincinnati the next year. But the whole thing with Trevor Bauer, and I'm going to be careful because I know a little bit more about this story, and I don't want to say,
Right.
I don't want to implicate people.
Oh,
But
yeah.
Bauer is a guy that he's not married, doesn't really have like a committed relationship. And he puts that out there to his, because I know a couple of girls who've been around Trevor Bauer, let's just say. And he's somebody, he puts that out on the table immediately by saying, look, I am a baseball player. I'm in my 20s or maybe early 30s now. I am not really the most faithful guy. I'm probably not going to be the greatest boyfriend, certainly wouldn't be a great husband. So this is where you can get off. If you don't want to have any kind of relationship or any talk right now, this is where we stop. If you are fine with this and there's no commitment, anything like that, then we'll have fun. And then you'll be my San Diego girl, and you'll be my Seattle girl, and you'll be my Chicago girl. And that's kind of what stories that I have heard about Trevor Bauer, shall we say. So he ends up getting railroaded, but it really ultimately is his, yes, he's not guilty. He didn't rape a woman. He was with a woman who liked rough sex, and she wanted strangle me, spank me, punch me, do this and that. And if you're a professional athlete, you need to realize this, especially if it's not your wife, to say, yeah, no, we're just doing missionary today. No, we're only going to do something because I don't want you coming across saying like, hey, you bruised me because we had rough sex. Hey, you pulled my hair too hard. Look at my follicles. Look at the hair that you yanked out of me right now. And that's his fault. And there's some guys have gone through this process too. So did she want rough sex? Yes. Should he have obliged? Absolutely not. And he's paying the price, and he's absolutely being railroaded, which is weird because you have somebody who's in the same town that Trevor Bauer was playing for a while, and Deshaun Watson for the Cleveland Browns, who's going into massage parlors and asking for hand jobs and everything like that not from Asian massage parlors where it's a wink and a nod. He's doing so at actual massage therapists and doing that, and credible dozens of accounts of this happening. And it's one of those cases of how does it work on one side, but Trevor Bauer, who again had rough sex with a girl, and she claimed way after the fact that, hey, maybe it was a little too rough. Now he has to play in Japan because no one else wants him because his name is Mud in the United States. I think it's out of line, but he should have probably understood what he was getting himself into when she was asking for that.
Right. He always came off like as abrasive and cocky. And I do feel bad for the guy, but like you said, he brought it on himself. He was making good money at the time. And I just think, is he like just paying his dues? And like, is this like his apology tour by going to Japan? I know he's not like verbally apologizing. I see his posts all the time, but like, does MLB, will they acknowledge him after he's pitched in Japan for a year and say, okay, you can come back now? Do you think that?
I don't think so. I think he's done.
You think he's done?
I think he's going to try to be a legend in Japan, like some players. Like after the 1994 strike, there were a lot of guys that said, "Yeah, I'm not going to No, I'm
Right.
not going to cross the picket line. I'm going to stay in Japan. A lot of guys spent the 95, 96 seasons over in Japan. I remember Shane Mack, who played with the Minnesota Twins, did that. And some guys will end up being huge stars overseas in Korea, Japan, whatever. But I think there was such a public outcry over Trevor Bauer that his name is so sullied and teams just do not want to go around it. And again, it's not like he did anything horribly wrong, but they're afraid, especially in a sport that is trying to cater to Gen Z, is trying to cater to women and cater to anything else to come into the ballpark. That's why every ballpark has a beer garden and a vape yard and this and that. So the last thing the Major League Baseball would want is a guy who has a rape threat around him, that there's going to be a huge protest. So I think baseball is just going to be like football can get away with it. NFL is like, oh yeah, we have 5 rapists on our team, and another guy ran over somebody drunk driving, and 2 guys murdered everybody. And it's like, but hey, as long as they're not kneeling for the flag on Sunday, NFL doesn't really care, and they don't have to deal with the repercussions when it comes to public relations blowbacks. But MLB has to, and that's what they're afraid of.
Right. And just going back to our rule changes, I just, I'm glancing over at this Padres Mets game. I'm looking at Buck Showalter, and I just realized this guy managed the Yankees in 1995. Before all this, he's been in baseball since the 70s. This guy was managing. He's probably the only current manager now that managed baseball in the mid 90s, and he's still managing. Like, I would love to
Dusty Baker.
Yeah, that too. I'm sorry, Dusty Baker. I would love to get those 2 guys and say, dude, what was it like managing in 1995 to managing now? Like, guys are being rewarded for pitching 5 innings. Oh, you pitched 5 innings. You threw 90 pitches. Great start. Like, it's just insane, man.
Buck Showalter was he was kind of one of the lackeys with Billy Martin. He was I think he was like the designated driver of Billy Martin's crew back in the late 80s. And because Billy ended up, I think his last go around with the Yankees was 88, and he got into an incident where he just started picking up dirt and throwing it at umpires. And then he got into yet another bar fight. And then they said, Billy's going to be our manager in 1990. And because he ended up dying in 89, or right around Christmas time, and Lou Piniella took the job with Marge Schott with Cincinnati, they had to, I think Bucky Dent was their manager, and they went through maybe Gene Michael. I forgot who was at the time. And Buck Showalter had been with the organization a number of years anyway, so they brought him on board. And he's there for 4 years. And you think about what Buck has done. I mean, he's a 4-time manager of the year. I think it was like 95, 2004. And he's done it with 4 separate teams. I think it was the Yankees, Rangers, Orioles, and then the Mets last year.
Yeah, and he opened up with the Diamondbacks too. I think he was their first manager.
He was, and just like with the Yankees, the Diamondbacks, they fire him, and the next year their new manager takes him and wins the World Series. And Bob Brenly.
He manages for like 2 or 3 years, and he's like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm just going to be a broadcaster now."
Well, he ended up getting let go, and he actually was in the Indians organization in 2006.
Okay. I didn't know this.
And he was, before he went to Baseball Tonight, he did some stuff in the Indians organization. Like, he had some kind of dumb role where he probably got an undeserved check, and they should have had Eric Wedge fired because he failed in 2006, kept him on board, and that just, But you had your opportunity, and now Buck Showalter still managing, Eric Wedge not managing anymore, will never manage in big league baseball.
Yeah.
But Buck is a guy that, no pun intended, is kind of bucking the trends of old school manager, does things his way, but he's not a guy that ignores, and this is my big thing, and I've talked about this on many podcasts about baseball or any sport, for example. I am a firm believer in analytics if they're used along with the eye test. And if you are a player, if you're a manager, if you're a general manager, if you're somebody in the organization, you need to have somebody that can look at things analytically, but also physically. You have to have somebody who's going to look at it. So like, you look at Moneyball, and they always bring up the example of Jason Giambi's leaving for free agency. He's going to get big money, probably going to the Yankees. Well, instead of finding our next Jason Giambi, the Athletics are going to have a platoon of 3 different guys to play in that position for way cheaper. And Scott Hatterberg apparently had a better on-base percentage than Jason Giambi. Okay, well, what happened? The Oakland
How did
hasn't been
that?
anywhere close. It's like you're going to tell me that Scott Hatterberg, who was a
Yeah.
backup catcher with the Boston Red Sox for a number of years, he hit one home run off Jason Grimsley that had 20 in a row for the Oakland A's. You're going to tell me that because he had a slightly higher on-base percentage than the AL MVP, that you're going to say, no, that's justified. And I think the Moneyball aspect is really kind of blown up, and it's not what it was 10, 15 years ago. Because there was a time where the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox would spend like drunken sailors, and you get your Pirates, your Indians, your Royals, your Brewers that were just like, yeah, we're the Marlins. The Marlins would open up camp, and the Yankees would have 2 players that made more than their entire roster. And everyone's like, oh, what's wrong with that? Well, eventually you had to change a little bit, and some of these teams had to finally spend some money. And George Steinbrenner said for so many years, if I have to pay for this revenue in this revenue sharing, I want you to, if you're taking money away from me, you need to use the money for something instead of putting it into your ballpark or upgrading your scoreboard a little bit. And it's like, no, you need to put it into your team and improve your team.
Yes.
It's just, it's amazing when you think about the, how things, I mean, again, I keep comparing eras, and I'm hoping that the teenagers and the kids that when I was really big into baseball in the 90s and the early 2000s, that those are the kids of today that will be there for tomorrow and doing podcasts, or God only knows what platform is going to be around in the next 15 years, that they have an opportunity to talk about what's going on currently in baseball. But I do encourage a lot of people to go watch old films, to go watch all the old, if they're on YouTube, go look it up, find a year, and you'll at least find full-on games. You'll find a lot of these teams and the history. Look up the 1980s for baseball. There are 2 teams that you're going to hear about in the next couple of days that it is kind of a fascinating case, because the Tampa Bay Rays are, what are they, 10-0 right now as we record this?
And that brings up another good point I want to say. They're jumbling the schedules now. Now divisional teams only play each other 12 or 13 times a year instead of 19 times a year.
Which I agree with.
On that. Okay,
I love that.
That is, yeah. You get teams that don't play each other that much, and people are like, oh, the Rays, they played against the Tigers and they played the Nationals, they played the Athletics. They're changing the schedule, which I do. Like I said, I like that because it's something new for the fans that go to the games live. Like, I live near Atlanta. Now the Braves play the Yankees in Atlanta a little more now. But before that, they'd go years without playing each other,
Yeah,
I do like that.
For me, I like the so as far as scheduling goes, if you're going to do 162 games, the divisional opponents, when they really start cranking that up, where each team plays the other team in their division 19 times, and they would all backload a lot of those at the end of the year. And especially if you're I don't know, I'm using like examples of lame teams that no one really cared about. Cincinnati versus Pittsburgh. For how many years? So you're going to tell me you're going to go to, let's say you're a Reds fan. You're going to Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati, and you want to go to a ball game, and yawn, the Pirates are in town. Great. Gee, I couldn't miss them. I couldn't see them this time. I guess I'm going to have to go see them the other 10 times this year that they'll come to town. And you just go, that's way too much against the same opponent. Then you had that time where if you're an East Coast fan of a team and a fan, and they go out for that big West Coast trip. So let's say you're a Blue Jays fan, or I'll say Yankees, and you get an opportunity to see them play Oakland, then they go play Anaheim, then they play or Texas, or they'll do something out there, or go up to Seattle for 3 games. So they'll do like a 10-game road trip on the West Coast, and then they wouldn't play the West Coast the rest of the year. Like, that's ridiculous. At least have a second trip where they can go out there. You get to see different teams. So I'm glad that they're cutting down on the divisional opponents. What I don't like is, because this is where I differ from the baseball purists. I do like interleague play. It gives me an opportunity. Now, I've now seen every team in Major League Baseball now, because before you would have to go out of town, or since like if you're in Atlanta, but you're an American League fan, that's great. But if you wanted to see your Yankees or an American League team, you're going to have to drive to what at that point, probably Tampa is probably your closest
Right.
American League team to Atlanta if you wanted to go see one of your teams. I was fine with that. I liked in the 90s and the 2000s. We go to Cincinnati, we go to Old Riverfront Stadium, and I would see the Indians play the Reds. Or I can go to Pittsburgh and maybe see the team play over there. But I liked when there was, it made for a fun time when they put it right before the All-Star break. It was in June.
Yeah, that's when they
And
would
you would
always
do
do
like
it,
2
like in
weeks of
June,
interleague.
July. Yep.
Like, so like the AL East is going to face the National League West this year. So you go, okay, so if you're a Yankee fan, you'll still see them play the Mets, because that's what it always is.
Yeah.
You have a built-in rivalry. But hey, I get to see the Padres. I get to see the Dodgers. This is kind of cool. I like this. Hey, Arizona's on the schedule, and there are teams that you didn't normally see. Well, now when you're having teams open up against an interleague opponent, it kind of takes away the luster. I like the fact that, hey, it's that time of interleague play starting in June. We get to see the Cubs that are coming to town, or, hey, I get to stay up and watch them play at Dodger Stadium. That was a fun little time at once. And now that they've interspersed it, I think it's taken away a lot of the luster of seeing other teams play.
Yeah, for sure. And I do enjoy the interleague play being spread out now. Now I can see interleague games in April, May, June, July, August, instead of just like that one condensed week. Well, I would look forward to that, but now that I enjoy, like, the Yankees open the season with the Giants playing them, like, first 3 games, that was nice, just something different. And I think they played the Phillies too in their next series, so it was like two interleague series back to back to open the season.
It's just weird, because it's kind of like how other sports do that. They do play every team because of just based on schedule and everything. But I don't know. I mean, I understand you don't want to see the same opponents over and over again, but I just liked it. It made something to kind of look forward to when you're getting to those dog days of the schedule, when you get to June,
like,
and you say,
hey,
the Marlins are coming to town. Let's go. I haven't never seen the Marlins. Like, I never got a chance to see the Montreal Expos. Would have been nice.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think I think Montreal came to my neck of the woods once in the brief maybe 7-8 years the interleague play was around with the Montreal Expos. So I still love the game. I love the game. Watching it now, I'll watch it after I get done with the podcast. I go back in time, I watch the games, like the 87 Brewers and the 82 Braves are the two teams that started the season 13-0. So Tampa is 10-0 right now as we're recording this podcast. They're trying to threaten for that. By the way, both those teams did not win anything. Atlanta did go to the playoffs, but they didn't really fare very well against St. Louis that year. And then that Milwaukee team, after they went 13-0, they went through a big slide, and they didn't really do much after that. So, okay, you start the season 10-0. That's not really indicative of what you're going to end up becoming. Oh, and Baltimore, by the way, I think they started the season in 1988. They were like 0-20. And then the next year they're threatening for the playoffs. So it's not really just based on those streaks. The Indians a couple of years ago had that streak where they won 22 in a row. What did that get them? They got bounced by the Yankees in the first round, but by CC Sabathia, who was in his late 60s, was pitching and couldn't throw a fastball at all. His fastball was gone, and still beat the team that won 102 games and 22 in a row. So those streaks are not necessarily going to tell you what's going to be for the year, but it is nice when you start putting things in some historical perspective there.
Yeah, it's good to see that, and it's good to. Now, do I think the Rays are going to make the playoffs? Potentially, yes. But typical Rays, they're a small money team, so they can't really do much at the trade deadline. If they do produce any superstars, they either trade them, or when they become a free agent, they let them go. So it's just, there's no real sustainability there with that ball club as far as like winning a World Series. And I remember when 2008, everybody was all excited. They had the new Rays logo. They're not the Devil Rays anymore. They were the Rays. They made the World Series. And they lost to the Phillies. And then after that, they've always been like a threat, to the Yankees. The Red Sox are terrible now. I don't know what's going on over there. just absolutely terrible. So I do think the top three teams are the Yankees, Jays, and Rays in that division. But yeah, like you said, 10-0, that's a good start, but it's a 162 game season. So anything could happen as far as
Yeah,
that goes.
when you look at how kind of the strength in Major League Baseball, I kind of look at the National League right now. I think it's a dogfight
Yeah.
in the National League. I think you're looking at, the Dodgers are always around and very relevant, and you have just down I-5 with the Padres are a very solid team who spends a ton of money. The Mets have an incredible amount of money they pumped into this team, and there are so many expectations about the Mets. If the Mets, if they blow it again like they did last year, oh my God! I mean, well, Buck Showalter won't survive. Even if he did win the Manager of the Year last year, he's not going to survive if they don't. Yeah. They're basically, they need to make the World Series right now. Yeah. So there is a lot going into the National League right now, and I think it's. Atlanta is always very relevant. You have Philadelphia wants to make a big comeback and go back to the World Series. Milwaukee Milwaukee has done a good job of being pretty relevant in the last couple of years.
I want to cut you off. I'm sorry, man. Yelich, that's another guy. He played during the Titan ball down era of 2019. He belted 44 home runs. I don't know if he won the MVP award. Look at his stats since 2019. Since that.
Wait, who are we talking about?
Christian Yelich.
Oh yeah,
people were comparing him to Trout. They're like, oh, this guy's up there. And then you go look at his numbers: 2020, 21, 22. It's lackluster.
He couldn't stay healthy. He hasn't been able to stay healthy at all, and that's why they've been putting him at DH so they can give him some more added at bats and less strain on the body. It's going to be an interesting baseball season. I think. Last year was kind of fun. The playoffs, you were seeing some teams like Philadelphia, they love their sports. And it was nice seeing that Philly was kind of on fire last year with the Eagles being as good as they were. And the Sixers kind of bouncing back from years of irrelevancy and Philly going to the World Series. And it was a fun time to see. And it's a fun time when you're around baseball. And I went to the playoff game last year in Cleveland when Oscar Gonzalez hit the walk-off home run. I was there. I saw the 15th inning when it was deadlocked at 0. There's nothing quite like playoff baseball, and especially when you're in a town that is prone to winning. The problem is I think there are a lot of teams that are fine with being I don't want to say I've been saying relevant constantly, but I think Cleveland, Tampa, Milwaukee, they never go for it. They never go for it when they have the opportunity to, whether spend a couple of bucks for a free agent or they're just on the cusp. And if you're an organization, I think if you're a town like Tampa that has never, they've been to 2 World Series, but they haven't won. If you're Milwaukee, outside of Giannis and what the Bucks have been doing recently, Milwaukee has barely made the playoffs, has barely been a blip on the national radar. Cleveland has had the longest drought as far as winning a championship, and that's 75 years this year. What would you rather have? Would you rather have 10 straight years of making the playoffs? And I'll ask you this. You're in Atlanta. If you're an Atlanta Braves fan, what would you rather have? It would 14 straight years of making the playoffs and hoisting that National League East Division Championship pennant, or would you trade a couple of those for a couple of extra championships? How do you have Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz, Fred McGriff, Chipper Jones, Marquise Grissom, all these great players, and you won 1 title out of it? And I'm wearing a Rich Stadium t-shirt as we record this podcast. Buffalo Bills, 4 straight Super Bowls. Didn't win. So you go, okay, that was great. There were fun times, Jim Kelly, everything. But would you have traded one of those for a championship? Look at Kansas City. The Royals have done nothing for years. But they won their World Series, and they'll always look back to 2015 and say, hey, what about the current team? It's like, wasn't 2015 cool? Wasn't that a great time? Yeah, but what about the current team? We need to look in terms of building but 2015. Do you remember where you were when Wade Davis threw that pitch and strike? It was amazing. We had a great time. Yes, but what about the current team? I'm telling you, Lorenzo Cain, Hosmer, Moustakas, Alex Gordon. Yes, but what? That's what you do. Or if you're Florida Marlins with Wayne Huizenga, they went all
93, 97, and 03. And they did a fire sale like a year or 2 after each championship.
after each one.
Yeah, Derek Lee, Juan Pierre, Luis Castillo, Mike Lee, Josh Beckett, AJ Burnett, Dontrell Willis, Hall of Famer that's playing right now. He's a lock for the Hall of Fame. Miguel Cabrera. He had all those guys playing.
And then they rebuild the next year, and Marlins haven't even been close to the playoffs since then. So I think if you're some of these organizations that you've been on playoff droughts or you've been on World Series or championship droughts, I think you have to make some kind of move and go all in. If you're not willing to do that for your fan base, then what are we doing here? What are we doing here? You just would rather win a bunch of games and make playoffs. And I just think at the end of the day, some teams just make those mistakes so they can create, I don't know. Like, again, I love the 90s Indians, but I look at them as they were losers. They didn't win. They went to two World Series. That was great. I had a great 95 Indians are still my favorite team ever. The 97, I was there watching. I didn't go to any of the games, but I watched every single pitch from those playoffs. Sandy Alamar's home run over the right field fence off of Mariano Rivera, the missed suicide squeeze attempt by Omar Vizquel that scored Marquise Grissom. Game 7 of the World Series and Jose Mesa. I watched all of that. And it was fun. I loved those times. But I would have traded any one of those years just so I can get that one championship. And no, just not happening.
For sure. In 2009, I was 15 years old. I watched every single inning and out of that 2009 Yankees playoff run. People say, oh, A-Rod was terrible in the playoffs. Yes, he was, except for that one year, 2009. He was like magic. I'll never forget Johnny Damon stealing 2 bases, in between pitches because
Robbie Cano,
going on. Yeah, I'll take that Yankees team over the current Yankees team. Like that lineup you just mentioned, you were sitting around A-Rod, Teixeira, Jeter, Cano, like those guys all could hit, and they all hit for average.
Last thing I'll mention, we were talking about, and then we'll wrap up the podcast here. The records that are not going to be broken. And Miguel Cabrera last year hit his 3,000th hit. Has 500 plus home runs. Like you said, locked for the Hall of Fame, has an over 300 batting average for his career. Unbelievable career. And I thought what made it even more unbelievable was when they got Prince Fielder and he said, I'm willing to move across the diamond because I want to try to win a championship. They didn't, but for a guy at that point in his career, while he's winning MVPs, back-to-back MVPs, triple crown, he did so as a third baseman, which is a much more taxing position than playing DH or first base because they had Victor Martinez at the time too.
Former Indian too.
Yes, Victor Martinez. But when I look at some of those, the 3,000 hits, and I think the last active guy with the most hits was Yadier Molina, and he just retired. I don't think you're having another 3,000 hit guy.
Cano was close, but he messed up with PEDs. I think he's sitting at like 26 and some change.
Yep. And even if he caught on somewhere in a couple of years, he ended up getting his 3,000th hit. They're not going to let him in the Hall of Fame because of the PED stuff. So I think if you look at career hits right now, I think I saw Elvis Andrus got his 2,000th hit. He's not going to the Hall of Fame.
No.
Would Jose Altuve have that opportunity if you look at his statistics? If he plays another 12, 13 years, and I just don't see that happening. He's been getting injured. He got hurt in the World Baseball Classic. Could Mike Trout do it? I don't think so. I think Trout's been injured.
Getting injured. Yep.
So I think so you won't see another 300 win pitcher. It's not going to happen. You might not even see a 200 win pitcher.
No. They're taking guys out after the 5th inning. Quality start. You remember that stat? Quality start. That's a quality start. Is you throw 6 innings and you give up 3 or less runs. Well, you're not going to have any quality starts if you throw 5 innings.
No one will pass Ricky Henderson's steal record, but I don't even think you're going to get guys. I think Starling Marte has 300 career stolen bases. I don't even know if you're going to get a guy who gets 500 ever at this rate, unless they play for a long time. I just think a lot of these records are just not going to be broken right now. And is that good for the sport? Does that kind of make those records look great by comparison? Kind of. That's you go, wow, look, I mean, imagine pitching that many games that you got 300 wins. Imagine you played in so many games that you were able to get this kind of batting average or this and this, and Ted Williams hitting 400, and guys like Tony Gwynn and George Brett that got pretty close to it. But I think I saw Jeff McNeil hit 320 something and led the league last year. It's like, then what are we doing here? So,
Yeah.
as much as I'm complaining about, I still love the sport. I'll still watch. I was watching tonight. I'll watch again, but I'm a little dubious as to whether or not these recent changes are going to have the impact that Rob Manfred, that some of these others think are going to happen in the games, because I'm skeptical, and I'd like to revisit this conversation that we're having in 5 to 10 years from now, because I don't know what's it going to take. So who knows?
Yeah.
Any last words here?
Last words. I think they might add another team. And like I said, I love the sport. I'll keep watching. I hope they don't shorten the season. Please don't go under 130 games. That's going to greatly depreciate the sport, greatly deplete, stats, value, everything.
Do you think they need to add teams, or do you think contraction could be a possibility?
I think they could add another team, maybe around the Tennessee, North Carolina area, maybe around Las Vegas. I think they could add another team. What do you think?
I think they need to take away teams. I think when you're looking at Miami and Tampa, that is as successful as Tampa's been, nobody who lives in Tampa is a Tampa Bay. Now, okay, I shouldn't say that. There's probably a few converts over the years, but if you live in Tampa, it's because your family is probably from New York and you're a Yankee fan.
Yeah,
so you
I've heard
down
that
there,
too.
and you're not going to give up the fact that you were a longtime Yankee fan because your parents moved you to Tampa. And say like, well, I guess I'm not a Yankee fan. I'm gonna go pick up my Wander Franco jersey. No, you may, but you're also going to be a Yankee fan, and that's just what it is. There's certain places that are not conducive to drawing fans anymore, and that opening day in Oakland, that team needs to be taken away from that town. And to be honest, they screwed with the town too many times as far as how the team goes. But they had opening day, and there was like more people at an Aldi on a Thursday afternoon than there was at Oakland, whatever they're calling it right now in Oakland. That's
oh my God,
it's sad, especially if you're a team like the Oakland Athletics, who's been a pretty historical team, but that team's probably got to end up moving to Vegas too, just like the Raiders did. Or
they could go back to what they did in the 50s, just bring one of those teams back to New York, add a third baseball team in New York. New Yorkers love baseball.
It's always weird when I see odd towns that could be potential for getting a team. I remember, because the reason I bring this up is Kansas City. They used to be the Kansas City Athletics, and before that they were in Philadelphia. And I think about the Kings, who are also in Kansas City for this. They're now the Sacramento Kings, but they used to be the Kansas City Omaha Kings, and they were just the Kansas City Kings. Before them, they were known as the Royals. So there were the Ohio Royals and the Rochester Royals. But there was talk before, because I think they had the longest playoff list streak or drought in pro sports. And Sacramento, about 10 years ago, was close to moving to, of all places, Virginia Beach. Because they said the population of Virginia Beach and Newport News and Norfolk are such this bustling community that they would accept an NBA team. And I'm like, yeah, you probably didn't think this one through, did you?
Yeah.
They may not be drawing much in Sacramento, but you're going to tell me the basketball team that they're going to do what they did in Oklahoma when they had to move the Hornets to Oklahoma City, and they said, hey, this team seems to support the team. Let's build a team here. Okay, well, sure, but it's going to be odd. But yeah, I think if you're Oakland, if you're looking to move to a different town, I think they would have to move a team as opposed to starting a new expansion team. Would it be Nashville? Would it be Charlotte? Would it be Vegas? Would it be Montreal? Who knows? Remember that weird thing they were going to say, that they were going to propose that Tampa was going to play half their home games in Montreal and half in Tampa? No, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think COVID kind of shot that down altogether. But yeah, I remember that they were just trying to find out ways. And then for a while, like 10 years ago, they're like, no, we might move the Rays to North Carolina, but North Carolina is too small of a market. It's more of like a baseball. football state. So they kind of kind of nixed that idea altogether.
Well, they also the other thing about Charlotte that I found out it's a big Steeler fan base. You'd think it's the Panthers have been really good and they had that 15-1 season with Cam Newton, but it's a Charlotte and in that area of North Carolina again. Many people are transplants. They moved there because they were tired and they're fans of the teams of the towns that they left. So it's interesting when you get into that region of the country, and I don't need to tell you this because you live there. You see it firsthand.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, last thing I'll ask you, is Atlanta as bad a sports town as people say it is?
Well, I don't live in Atlanta. I live a few hours away. I don't think it's as bad as a town it is. There's just a lot of other than the Braves winning the World Series, it's just a lot of heartache when there's football season. They go all out. It's either Cowboys or Falcons, and
Cowboys.
A lot of heartache. Yeah, a lot of Cowboys fans down here, man.
I don't get it. I just remember in '95 when David Justice was ripping on the fans and saying that they're sitting on their hands while up in Cleveland. It's like, we're winning the World Series here, and you guys are just like, yay, and tomahawk chop, whatever. Yeah. But I've heard that for years that Atlanta had been kind of a lame sports market. I mean, they lost 2 hockey teams.
Well, I've met a lot of Southern guys, Hicks, rednecks, whatever you call them, like Southern guys. And, I'll ask them, hey, do you and they're from Georgia. Hey, do you like sports? No. And these are grown men. They love to hunt. They love all this, but do you like sports? The answer is no.
That's a good point.
So I don't know. It's just, Southerners, a lot of them, they don't appreciate, well, I don't want to say they don't appreciate sports. It's like, they're just not brought up, involving their kids in sports. And that's just not how they were raised. They were raised, work on the farm, do this and do that, hunt, but sports, no, there's just nothing that they found interest in.
Hobbies that matter, I guess. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. We'll get the plugs back. Where can we listen to the podcast, and where can we find you on social media?
This guy gets it 93 at twitter.com, and Brandon's sh*TTY stream at youtube.com. I'm going to be doing a baseball episode this Saturday. Might have some NBA talk in there as well, but a little bit of comedy. We try to be funny, even though we're not professional comedians like you guys. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And thanks everyone for checking out this podcast today. If you're listening for free, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur. For $5 a month. You get 20 something podcasts a month. And if you pay me an extra $5, you get extra podcasts per week. So go check that out at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur, or at locals at Check Your Brain. Find that on locals.com. And if you just want to be a freeloader and listen to the free podcast every week, goes out every Wednesday morning. So thank you everybody for listening to this week's edition of the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you again. And hope you can subscribe. If not, oh well, I don't know what to tell you.